So in our Tuesday night small group, we've been looking at how to read the Bible for all it's worth, and we've been kind of slowly working through that. And the chapter that we're in now is the chapter on Psalms. And we looked at a psalm a couple weeks ago that was a song of praise related to God's nature and God's deliverance. And we're going to look at a different one today, Psalm 35, that is called an imprecatory psalm. And I know that's a mouthful. We'll talk about what that is like and what characterizes those psalms here in just a little bit. But the title of our study is God is on My Side, or is He? And this psalm is really kind of interesting in how the psalmist, and it says it's a psalm of David, how the psalmist is really praying that God will join his team, that God will take up his battle and fight for him. And it's just kind of human nature to think that God is on our side and God has our back and God is watching out for us. And this particular psalm has some very interesting things to say about that. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever, and these are things I have done. I've done all these things, by the way. Have you ever prayed at a sporting event for your team to win? Now, come on. We know we've all done that, right? If you're interested in sports at all, pray that your team would win and pray that your team would do well. Or how about this? Pray that you'd have a successful fishing trip. I've always wondered what that fish might be praying. But I've prayed to catch a fish. Have you? Asked God to be on my side and to help me be successful in my fishing, or prayed for a successful hunt. I've wondered what that poor moose is praying while I'm out praying that I might bag a moose. So I'm sure we've all done these kinds of things, and I think we all realize that in the scope of things, our team winning or catching the fish or shooting the moose are not, in the overall scope of things, big important things that we know we should be bothering God about. But let me ask you this. Have you ever done this? Have you ever prayed against an adversary? Think about that for a minute. Have you ever prayed for something bad to happen to someone else who's doing you wrong? Have you prayed for God to make them pay, to kind of set the record straight and level the playing field? Have you ever prayed against an adversary? Have you ever prayed that something bad would happen to an enemy? Maybe it's a personal enemy. For those of you that have been in the military, maybe it's a military enemy. I have on my prayer list a section called enemies. And it's not people, at least I don't have any persons there yet. I may someday stick someone on there. But it's countries, and you know how that goes. Is an enemy in this decade, maybe a friend in the next decade, and we have a different enemy. It's really quite inconsistent. But have you ever prayed against someone? It's a scary thought to pray against someone. Well, if you have and are honest, you are in good company, the company of people in the Bible. Now, Spurgeon said, all good men wish confusion on their enemies. And I think that's probably true for most of us. So here's Psalm 135. It's a long psalm, so we're not going to have a chance to look at all of it, but I've picked out what I think are some pertinent passages. And the first is these opening lines. Oh Lord, oppose those who oppose me. I love that. It makes me sarcastically smile. Isn't that the way we look at life? Oppose those who oppose me. Whatever our perspective is, we want God to have our back and to take our side. Fight those who fight against me. Put on your armor, take up your shield, prepare for battle, and come to my aid. Pretty arrogant, pretty strong language. Lift up your spear and javelin against those who pursue me. Let me hear you say, I will give you victory. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have all this? That those who oppose us would be taken down. That those who fight against us would be taken out. That those who pursue us would be confronted not just by us, but by God, who has our back. We assume that our enemy is God's enemy. Why? Because we naturally assume, naively and often blindly, that we are in the right and they are in the wrong. So in this passage, David mentions all these things that his enemies are trying to do. Just take a look at this list: out to kill him, plotting his ruin, witnessing against him, slandering him, mocking him, gloating over his misfortune, making false accusations, speaking uncivilly to him. And there's others. I just pulled a half dozen of these out of here. David has a long list of things that he's unhappy with about his adversaries, his enemies. So these are a few of them. So here's what he prays. He says, bring shame and disgrace on those trying to kill me. Turn them back and humiliate those who want to harm me. Blow them away like chaff in the wind, a wind sent by an angel of the Lord. You say, this isn't a very Christian prayer, is it? Make their path dark and slippery with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. I did them no wrong, but they laid a trap for me. I did them no wrong, but they dug a pit to catch me. So let sudden ruin come upon them. How's that for a prayer? Let sudden ruin come upon them. Let them be caught in the trap they've set for me. Let them be destroyed in the pit they dug for me. So, some pretty straightforward things that David prays, very much in lines of feelings that we have against our adversaries, against our enemies, against that person who's done us wrong or said things that are unkind, against that person that has humiliated us, or the person who has stood against us in opposition. We want them to be ashamed of what they've done. We want them to experience the disgrace. We see ourselves as doing no wrong, and that they being involved, they being the sole individuals that are involved in this fight against us. Notice the language here: blow them away like chaff in the wind. Send your angel, the angel of the Lord, against them. Make their path dark and slippery. And then the clincher is verse 8 there: let sudden ruin come upon them. Now, the Psalms are experiential. And I'm not saying that the Psalms aren't theological, because they are in many ways, but they are mostly experiential. In other words, the psalmist is writing what he or she feels. And it's an expression of the same kinds of feelings and reactions that we have, and in this case, reactions that we have when someone is opposing us, when someone is standing against us. So these are all the same kinds of emotions and desires that we have, and David here is bold enough to write it down put it in a book and saying, this is what I'm asking God to do for me. Pretty interesting. And I love verse 13 and 14. I don't know if I'm just taking this too tongue-in-cheek or, too sarcastically, but it says, "Yet when they were ill, I grieved for them. I denied myself by fasting for them, but my prayers returned unanswered. I was sad as though they were my friends or family, as if I were grieving for my own mother. But they are glad now that I'm in trouble. They gleefully join together against me. I'm attacked by people I don't even know. They slander me constantly." So the way David remembers this is that when they were having a hard time, he went to bat for them. He prayed for them. He was concerned for them. He grieved for them like he would his own mother. Did he really? That's the way he sees it. And that's the way we see it, is we see this as all unfair, that these terrible things that these people are conspiring against us. At the very last line there, I'm attacked by people I don't even know. They slander me constantly. Yet when the shoe was on the other foot, when they were the ones experiencing trouble, I didn't treat them that way. And so maybe that's exactly the way David was, or maybe his recollection is like we tend to recollect, is that, oh, we would never act that way. We would never do the kinds of things our enemies are doing. We would never stoop to such saying such terrible things or thinking such terrible things. So this is Psalm 35 so far. David's in trouble. He may have been sick from, if you read the psalm a little further, whatever it is, his enemies are glad and they're gloating over him. He's under attack. He's on the run. Things are not going the way he would like. Now, just an aside here, since we're talking about biblical interpretation, there are a number of categories of Psalms, and going all the way back to the 19th century, 18th century too, people have tried to categorize these Psalms, and so these categories all vary, but there are some songs that are songs of praise for God's nature. Some are songs of thanksgiving for deliverance from very specific things. Some are songs in honor of the king or in honor of the Messiah. Those are some general kinds of categories of Psalms. But then there's this category called lament, and 3 out of every 5 Psalms in the Bible come from this category of laments. 3 out of every 5. So more than half of the Psalms are laments, which are basically complaints to God about the way things are going and prayers to God that God will change things. And I'm thankful now that many of our songs of worship aren't ignoring the fact that some people come to church with a chip on their shoulder, with a sense that things are bad and not good, and a desire for God to kind of rectify things and to protect and come to the defense of individuals that are in the time of worship. So there's individual laments, there's communal laments where a community is expressing the fact that, hey, we're in trouble. God, we feel like you've abandoned us. Come to our aid, hear our cry, and come to our defense. But one of these kinds of laments is called an imprecatory psalm. And an imprecation is a curse or a prayer of ill will against someone else. It's a prayer against someone rather than a prayer for someone. And Psalm 35 is actually one of the milder cases in the Old Testament. If you get time, read Psalm 109 sometime. And you'll see some very harsh prayers against other people. And so these imprecatory psalms, again, they're experiential. They're expressing what is in the heart of a person. And if we were honest with ourselves, we've all desired the demise. Maybe the demise is too strong a language, but we've all desired the demise of our enemy, of somebody that is causing trouble for us, that is disrespecting us, that is abusing us, that is hurting us in some way. That's just a part of the way we are. So let's shift gears here a little bit. This is a strange story here. Let me give you the context before I read it. The context is right before the Battle of Jericho. And you know the story, how God went in and delivered the people of Israel. And Joshua, of course, was their military commander. And God supernaturally delivered Israel from Jericho and actually allowed their conquest of that city. And so Joshua is approaching this battle in chapter 5 of the book of Joshua. And I didn't put the reference on here, my mistake. This is from Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. It says, "As Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in his hand." Now, think back to this language in Psalm 35, where David asked God to grab his sword, grab his shield, grab his javelin, and come to battle for me. So Joshua sees this guy standing there with his sword in his hand, and Joshua goes up to him and demands, notice the language, he's not asking, he's demanding, "Are you for us or against us?" "Neither one," he replied. "I'm the commander of the Lord's army." Now Joshua is the commander of the troops of Israel. And so Joshua says, "Hey, are you with us or against us?" He says, "Neither one. I'm my own guy. I'm my own commander. I'm commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. I love this story. And in fact, in the very next verses, God goes with them and delivers them from the hand of the armies of Jericho. But a couple points here. First of all, God is neutral, where we all expect God to be on our side. We demand it. We pray for it. We want it. And that's simply not always the case. There's stuff you don't know about. You don't know what that other person is going through. You don't know what their life is like. And it's pretty simplistic for us to demand that God take our side. So God is neutral. God is holy. This is just like the story of Moses on the mount there in Sinai, where God says to him, "Hey, take off your shoes because you're holy on holy ground." And that's exactly the same command that Joshua receives here. And so what I love about this is that Joshua is expecting somebody, this commander, to take his side. Are you with us or against us? Choose now. We give God these ultimatums. Okay, God, are you for me or against me? This commander says, "Hey, look, I'm the commander, not you. I am." And at this, Joshua says, "I am at your command. Do what you want your servant to do." So this is an Old Testament story that kind of puts Psalm 35 in a little different light as we think of these prayers against an enemy. Well, Jesus removes all doubt, and many would argue that Jesus's words here render inadequate these imprecatory prayers in the Old Testament, these prayers against someone else. Just because they're in the Bible doesn't mean they are endorsed by the theology of the Bible, the entire Bible. So Jesus opens a completely new door here. He says, you've heard the law that says love your enemy, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. By the way, the law only said love your neighbor. It never said hate your enemy. But of course, people take liberties with the law all the time. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Don't pray against them. Pray for them. In that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight on both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. Do you see how similar this is to the Joshua story? God is neutral. God just doesn't send rain on good people, rain on bad people, and sun on good people. God doesn't just make life rosy for the righteous and horrible for the wicked. God doesn't play by the same rules that we have. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax gatherers do that much. If you're kind only to your friends, how are you to be different from anyone else? How are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So in spite of the fact that we don't like it, this is what Jesus asks us to do. Not to pray against, to pray for. And I must honestly say, I've had to ask myself that question. Have I prayed against? Who have I prayed against? I understand spiritual battles and praying against the forces of evil and praying against evil wherever we see that. I think that's important. But have I internalized that evil and taken that person who I perceive to be evil and prayed against them? Jesus says to stop it. He says to pray for those who persecute you. I've thought of bullies in life. There are kinds of bullies in the workplace, out of the workplace. But this is typically the prayer that we pray. God, fight with those who fight against me. Take our side. And I hope we've seen there's a different picture to that. So an application. First of all, let me just say that these kinds of feelings that we experience where somebody has wronged us, has oppressed us, has slandered us, has hurt us, these kinds of feelings are normal. You say, oh, I'm a terrible person for feeling these things. No, you are a person for feeling these things. That's just a natural reaction. So the fact that you sense this injustice that others have not done what is right by you is a normal feeling. It's a natural feeling. There's nothing unusual about it. I face these same kinds of feelings. You face them. Our friends and our enemies face these same kinds of feelings towards others. And I would say that it is not just normal and it's not just natural, but it is neutral. In other words, when you experience these feelings of hostility toward other people, it's not the feeling that is the issue. Feeling is neutral. That's just natural. It's part of who we are. The question is what will we do with that feeling? How will we respond? How will we act? The feeling itself is normal. It is natural. It is neutral. But the question is, how do we respond? So it's how we act that matters. And the New Testament doesn't leave the Christian the option of praying for the demise of our enemies. Don't take it up with me, take it up with Jesus. That's what he said. That's what he asks us to do, to respond in a different way. God is not necessarily on our side. In fact, we need to convert the question. So not the question is, God, what are you going to do for me? The question is, are we on God's side? We need to pray the prayer that Joshua did. I am at your command. And I think if we entrust our enemies to God's care and keeping, as upside down as that sounds, and we entrust ourselves to God's care and keeping, and then we say, okay, God, what do you want me to do? I think we may be surprised about what he asks. So these imprecatory psalms present a challenge, but what I like about them is they are as natural as every emotion that we face. It's how we respond to that that matters.